Esnargon Fire and Safety, a lease agreement with PacNet, a lease agreement with Precision Motorcycles. We'll skip item number 7, which we've removed. A lease agreement with the Utility Tree Service, a lease agreement with Clark Van Deventer, and we also would receive the monthly property management report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The consent calendar has been approved. Item number 7, the recommendation is that the commission approve and authorize the airport director to execute a 1-year lease agreement with Santa Barbara Electronic Supply LLC, a California limited liability company, for 1,930 square feet of building 312 Suite C at 1503 Cecil Cook Place at the Santa Barbara Airport, effective January 1, 2017, ending December 31, 2017, for a monthly rental of $1,896 exclusive of utilities. Do you have a report?
Yes, we have a presentation for you.
Okay.
Commissioners, not only am I sitting in for Hazel Johns today, I will be happy to give this presentation, which is, let's see here, make sure we get the right one up. Do we click on the right link? Where are we going? Oh, here we go. That's the problem. Excellent. All righty. So I will step to the podium if that's all right. And I have the remote. All right. Good evening. Item number 7 on the agenda this evening has to do with rental of airport property, airport square footage space. So I'd like to just give you a quick overview of what it is that we are trying to accomplish with the rentals of our various properties here at the airport, some of the challenges that we have with that, and some specifics about the space in question for this particular item. So first of all, airport properties. I think for those of you who've been with us for a while know that there is a considerable amount of space for lease on airport property. I've actually been in aviation quite some time, and I don't think I've come across an airport that has quite the amount of square footage on airport property to lease. It's a good thing. As you can see here, we have quite a bit that is commercial industrial space and quite a bit that is non-commercial aviation supporting space. The diversity of tenants that we have is somewhat incredible, really, because we have everything from a motorcycle repair shop to a retail store for fire extinguishers and fire equipment like we've had on the agenda earlier today. We have a restaurant next door. So we have a very, very broad diversity of tenants out there. And the usage of those spaces that they lease from us are also as diverse. They are using those spaces for office space, storage space, retail space, R&D, light manufacturing. The list sort of goes on. And when it comes to the commercial industrial space, it's generating nearly 1/3 of the total operating revenues. And what's important about that is that the commercial industrial space, by virtue of the contribution it makes to the total airport operating revenues, because the airport is sort of a closed circle with revenues staying within the airport, even those rentals for commercial industrial space are supporting the mission of the airport as an airport. And that's all part of what we do. Examples of property types, you're well familiar with this. We've new facilities such as the terminal, the rental car QTA. We have many, many 1940s era structures on the space. We have newer tie-down or T-hangars. We have yard space, open tie-down space, the ampersand hangar, which of course is an airport property. And next to that, a very large freestanding office building. We have a freestanding restaurant. So this really is sort of, I think of the property types that we have here somewhat as like cats and dogs. There's really not one breed of all of these. They're just sort of a mixture. And it's a great thing because it makes itself appealing to different types of tenants. So some of the challenges that we have with leasing these spaces, first of all, challenging configurations. And a lot of that has to do with the vintage of many of these spaces, especially the 1940s vintage spaces. Most of the time, they were originally built for something else. They were originally built to serve a different purpose. And over the years, they have been configured, reconfigured. And so we have a challenge oftentimes trying to put together spaces that are attractive for leasing on the marketplace. Utilities are also a challenge for us. If you can imagine a building with maybe 3 or 4 tenants in it, and there's one water meter. So you're challenged with trying to figure out, usually dividing the utilities based on square footage use. But sometimes you have a tenant that you know is using more utilities than another, and so we have to work with that. Condition, again, many of these older buildings were really not built to last. They last because we make them last. We maintain them and repair them and keep them in good condition, but it's sort of like a drip from a faucet. It just keeps on going, and it's really hard to stop. Access and location can also be challenging. Just for different types of businesses, having store frontage or frontage that's visible for customers sometimes can be a challenge, or visitors or clients. So our leasing objectives, we seek to maintain a leased space rate of 98%, which is very high. Obviously, the reason for that is because if it's not leased, it's not generating revenue. If it's not generating revenue, it's not supporting the airport. It's really that simple. Our objective, of course, is to generate fair market value for the leased space that we have on the marketplace. We're actually required to do that. That is a requirement that we have. We also work to try to identify the most appropriate tenant for any given space, because sometimes these spaces lend themselves particularly well to some particular type of use, and sometimes they don't. And so we really try to work and see if we can find tenants and businesses and operations that fit the spaces that we have. And of course, we always strive to support the core mission of the airport, which is aviation. So I'm going to talk just briefly about this particular space. This is Building 312. It's located on Cecil Cook Place. It is a freestanding building, and I believe it is sort of the 1940s vintage building. It is partially occupied by Above All Aviation and Innovati. It is also partially vacant. One portion of it has been vacant since November of 2015. And there is another portion that has been vacant since August of 2016, and that was the former Red Baron flight school that was in that space. So sometimes the best way to sort of depict this is to just look at it. So here is a not incredibly detailed map, but nonetheless, and I'm going to try to use my pointer here just a little bit if I can without. Okay, so this space right over here, I just want to show you that, point that out. That is Innovati. That is an R&D non-aviation tenant. It is a completely separate space. There is a wall, load-bearing wall in here. So this has its own restrooms. It's completely self-contained and not really part of the rest of the building, even though, of course, it is attached. This upper area here is, of course, Above All Aviation. And earlier, I would say late last year, later in the fall, when we did have discussions with Above All about adding additional space to their premises, we ultimately settled on adding this space right here, which is a conference room. And that was added to the premises in November of 2016. So the premises did expand, even though originally there was some discussion about more space here. The space on the end that I mentioned about Red Baron being formerly there, this is Red Baron. And the thing that is great about this space for an aviation business is the access to the airfield. Right there is a door that is part of that space that is airfield access. It's really a great space for that type of activity. There is a common area corridor right through here, as you can see, to common area restrooms. All of these spaces have at least 2 egress doors, 2 means of getting out. Some of them have 3. So the last vacant space, and the space that is really being considered this evening, is this space in the middle. And that space is, as I mentioned, been vacant since November of 15, and we're proposing its use by Santa Barbara Electronics. This space, we consider to be a perfect use for Santa Barbara Electronics. It is a very big, open space, and they're going to be using it, propose using it for quite a bit of storage, since they're an electronic supply parts operation. So there'll be a lot of storage racks and things in there. The other thing about it is that these folks with this type of operation neither have nor need access to the airfield. So, so that space is somewhat contained in that it doesn't go out into the airfield. So this is essentially what we are proposing is to use this space. As I mentioned before, it has been vacant. And though we did have discussions with Above All Aviation initially about taking larger portions of the space, that ultimately was not fruitful. So we moved on to trying to identify another tenant for that space. And quite frankly, that is a difficult space to lease, just because it is so special, that we consider ourselves pretty fortunate that we actually found a tenant that could go into that space, and that we really have no other space on airport property that will be suited for it. So I'm happy to take any questions, and then I believe we have several people that would like to comment.
Just a couple of questions. Thank you. The few slides before, which you don't need to go back to, where you showed the amount of square feet, was approximately 144,000 commercial and approximately 158,000 non-commercial. The commercial portion, that probably includes the main terminal? Or which one of those includes
Actually, the main
terminal?
terminal is not included
It's
in
not
either
included
of
in
those.
those at
No, no.
Okay. All right, and then the second question is how do we determine the fair market value?
You know, that is something that we research at least a couple times a year, and that's basically looking at the broader Santa Barbara market. Sometimes it can be hard for us to find comparables, but usually Rebecca Fribley does a pretty good job of that, has been doing it for a while. And there's essentially ranges, pretty, defined ranges for what the marketplace will bear for a specific type of use. It can fluctuate, of course, over time, depending upon when people negotiate leases, if the economy is good or bad, that kind of thing. But it's usually not very difficult for us to ascertain.
Got it. And do we kind of accommodate people who want to lease? Some of these buildings are seasoned.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which is code for, a few of them about ready to fall down. So do we kind of make adjustments for that as well? Or
Well,
do we say, look, the light industrial space in Goleta is going for, 90 cents a square foot to $1.20, so therefore we're going to pick some number in between there.
Well, usually the range, the range will be that a more improved space will be at the upper end of that range, and a less improved space will be at the lower end of that. So we're kind of able to look at the condition of comparable spaces and see what those are typically going for.
All righty. And then last question, and then I'm done. The space, the big open space there that's the subject we're talking about, so storage, is that primarily going to be a storage facility, or is it a,
Well,
what does that mean?
There will be quite a bit of storage in there. There also is a retail component to this. People will come in to pick up things that they order, or, deliveries and that kind of thing. So there will be some retail activity. It's a pretty specialized business, and the folks that use that business know what they're doing, and they know what they want, and this is really one of the, if I understand it correctly, it's really the only provider of these types of products anywhere in the local vicinity.
This, just for reference, this is the Marvac,
Former Marvac, as I
former
understand
Marvac,
it, yes.
over in the shopping center down the
Yes.
street.
Yes,
Okay, thank you very much.
yes.
Concerning the lease rates, am I correct in remembering that once or a year, the commission approves a set of rates that has a range? So for any given type of property, that range of rates comes here to the public and is approved?
That's correct, and that's the work that Rebecca does every year to
Okay.
revise those rates. And then, of course, most of our leases, if they are longer than a year, they will have an escalation in them, a typical, 3% or so escalation in them, according to CPI, so that's pretty standard.
Any other questions here? We have several speakers.
Well, I did have several questions that I had sent to Deanna, and she had given me a number of answers. But I probably do have some more questions, but I can wait till after the public comment
Okay,
and go
that's
through
great.
those.
All right.
Okay, first is Sean Sullivan from Above All Aviation. And these are, please remember that these are comments as opposed to a back and forth question and answer. and that we request you to limit to 2 minutes. I'll be a little bit loose here because we have a small number, but it is somewhat limited.
There's one of each of those for you.
One
Oh.
for each of us?
Yeah. My name is Sean Sullivan. I'm the owner of Above All Aviation. I'm asking that this item be removed, as I see that it has, to take time to I'm really nervous right now, to take time to discuss the lease. And you'll see before you, there's a lot of emails to go through, but you'll see that Above All, in good faith, numerous times asked for that space. And again, we asked for a warehouse pricing for the big open space to be denied, basically. When I had a conversation the other day, I asked, why weren't we notified about this space being available again? And I was told because I had said I didn't have a use for the warehouse space, which is true, but as a discount, I would have taken that space and utilized the conference room and kitchen and break room. And also that I had told them that I would not be able to financially afford this space, which again was taken out of context. So I asked this be tabled until we have a time to sit down as a group to make this fair and equitable to both parties involved.
Thank you. Next is Bill Peterson from Above All Aviation.
Good evening. I was actually supposed to speak before Sean, so I'm just reiterating what she had said about before you got a complete list of correspondence between Above All Aviation and the city regarding that space. And I guess we're just looking for a clarification as to what the market value or the market rate for that space is, and what was currently granted to the other vendor, because I believe we came in at a higher price. Or we negotiated a higher price than they actually accepted for the other vendors. So that's just my comment, just clarification. We want to make sure that it's fair. So thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ken Alker. I hope I pronounced that reasonably close.
It's Alker. That was
Alker.
good enough.
All
I can
right.
give you about 8 other varieties. I have a 9-minute speech, which I'm going to cut down to 2 minutes. So I'm going to talk as fast as I can. I'm the owner of Santa Barbara Electronic Supply. We're an electronic repair and parts store, essentially. We're in the Magnolia Center, as was mentioned, formerly Marvac Electronics. Marvac has been in town for about 40 or 50 years. They decided to shut it down about 1.5 years ago. I heard about that. I'm an electrical engineer. I've been shopping there since I was in college at UCSB in the 80s. I didn't want to see it go away, so I stepped in and asked if we could take it over. They were very happy to transfer it to us because they had a lot of ties into Santa Barbara, and they were getting a lot of frustrated people calling them saying, please don't go, we need you. There's no one else to supply us with these parts. The opportunity to move to the airport came up recently. We've been looking for a new location for about 6 months. We negotiated a lease in good faith. I understand that's done. We've given notice to the Magnolia Center. We have to be completely out of there by February 1st, which gives us about 2 weeks to go. The type of people that we supply parts for are local companies mostly. Some examples of that would be Meripro, Reson formerly, before they left, Electronic Parts Center across the street, Sonatech, the Hackerspace, Raytheon, Biopac Systems on Aero Camino, ABC Clio, UCSB, FLIR, Carl Stort's Imaging across the street, Republic Elevator across the street, Transform, the Cancer Center of Santa Barbara, Kachuma Operations and Maintenance, Electro-Optical, Isolite, Sonos, AMS, Westmont College, Soil Moisture Equipment Corporation, the Santa Barbara County Sheriff, the county, the Cottage Hospital, County Flood, County GS, City of Santa Barbara, the Cater Water Treatment Plant, City of Goleta, County of Santa Barbara, Goleta Unified School District, Santa Barbara Unified School District, Saratoga District, Water District, La Cumbre Water Supply, etc. One of our biggest clients is the Santa Barbara Amateur Radio Club. They're a local ham radio club that has been established since 1920. Nearly 100 years ago, they aid in disaster, terrorist attacks, and other events in the communications field. They maintain repeaters at Broadcast Peak, San Ynez Peak, La Cumbre Peak, and the Mesa, the VicTrace site. They use us to procure their coax antennas, headsets, radios, microphones, and such. We also have a lot of aviation-related clients who use our services for hobby airplanes as well as experimental airplanes. They buy their lights, their switches, their batteries, their heat shrink, wire coax, and other products from us. They also special order a lot of products for their planes. In any event, I was really going to stand up here and say that I'm glad that the airport is supporting our local business. I'm very pleased to be renting from the airport, again, because I also am a tenant over at David Love Place. My partners and I bought the 81, or formerly 323 David Love Place building from Pactuco in 1992. This is our 25th anniversary on airport property. As tenants, we have a land lease.
Can you wrap up, please?
I'm done. Yep, thank you very much for accommodating us. I'm looking forward to a second long-term relationship with the airport.
Thank you. Paula Hammer?
Hi, I'm Paula Hamer, and I work for Santa Barbara Electronics. And we're actually pretty excited to be coming over here. And I also work off of David Love as well with Ken and the other businesses. So it's a great convenience for us to be so local here downtown. And you know, with the way things are in play as far as the notice to vacate, this is perfect timing for us with this lease to be able to move in here, and everyone gets to keep their jobs, and the community gets to continue to receive great service and great products.
Thank you. Jay, I'm sorry, I can't see this last name. Hannigan? Hannigan?
Hello, my name's Jay Hennigan. I've been a Santa Barbara resident since 1976. I'm an amateur radio operator, electronics enthusiast, and formerly was the chief electronics technician for the city of Santa Barbara. I also have worked for the U.S. Forest Service as an electronics technician. Having a local parts store is really crucial for timely repair of gear. The only alternative is mail order from somebody out of state, and then paying shipping and waiting for critical parts. Quite frequently, you need a small part, you can go and pick it up. Radio Shack has been out of that business for at least a couple of decades. They were kind of the other go-to place, and Marvac and its predecessors have been a tremendous resource. As I said, the only alternative is mail order, paying shipping, waiting several days, or driving out of county down to Fry's Electronics in Oxnard. So I'm asking that you consider allowing this resource to remain, and also avionics people that need electronics parts as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any additional speakers? Do we have any comments or questions from the commissioners?
Might add that we have several emails of support as well that we were provided.
The letters are
We have copies of those emails. They're in our folders.
yeah, the letters are, I saw them in the back.
Necessary to summarize those?
I don't think the summary's there, I think just the two letters. I didn't see a summary.
Are both of these? So we had a email from Brian Milburn, president of the Santa Barbara Amateur Radio Club. Was that opinion represented in public comment? I think it was.
And then Ryan.
An email from Ryan Elliott, mechanical engineer for MaraPro, also stating his support for
Santa Barbara Electronics to be in that space due to its, kind of unique ability to provide electronics parts locally, which was basically, I think, the thrust of the note from the Amateur Radio Club president, supporting the fact that they kind of provide a unique service. It's yours. So I did have some questions. We have this, thank you, Ms. Sullivan, for all this documentation. It looks like there was a lot of discussion or inquiries about the space previously. It seemed like most of those were around trying to get the space at a discount. And then it looks like in that I didn't see anything that actually represented an offer. Is it the case that prior to the, and then I'll say, then on January 16th, it looks like after finding that there was a agenda item for a lease approval, there was on January 16th an email with a proposal for that space. Was there any proposal, actual written proposal for that space prior to that?
Not prior to that time, no.
Okay. And that proposal is at a higher rate? Is that my understanding of what?
Yes, that is a market rate proposal.
And are both proposals market rate? Within our market rate ranges?
They seem to be. We don't have complete information on the proposal that you received just because we're not entirely sure of what the proposed space uses are. But there are obviously rates indicated there for different types of uses. Just not sure which amount of square footage would be for what use. Whereas we have that obviously we have that defined very in detail with the Santa Barbara Electronics.
And the Santa Barbara Electronics lease was negotiated back in December, is that correct?
December, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we did, notify the above all tenant that we had a prospective tenant back before Christmas, around the 20th of December. And we, of course, had other prospective tenants going through that space, and the adjacent space where Red Baron was. We had a number of folks come and take a look at it. We just didn't get any takers.
And I know one of my questions specifically to you yesterday was on this space. So above all, would continue to have access to the ramp regardless of this space?
Actually, that is not the case anymore, and I can explain how that is. I should explain how it worked. Oh, it's just water. How it worked prior to Red Baron leaving that space. If you look, I'll try to point right here. So this corridor and into this area was common space. So when Red Baron was in that space, they weren't actually paying for that space. It was common space. Once Above All moved into this space up here, we were faced with a situation where we had Above All staff, students, going through this area and out to access the airfield door. So unfortunately, that in effect meant that Above All was entering or in great proximity to Red Baron space, and of course the two were competitors. So that was a source of problem for the Red Baron tenant particularly. So once Red Baron left, logically to look at this space, we needed to make this one contiguous space in order to have really any hope of leasing it. Because if we try to lease it to somebody, just this area, and this is common space going through here, first of all, nobody is paying for that, so we're not making money off of it. But second of all, now you have a new tenant that's got people walking through their space. So it just was not going to be a marketable situation to have that space traversing like that to the door. This is a great aviation space because whoever's in this space has that access to the airfield. And that was one of the discussions we had early on with Above All, is to whether it wouldn't be better to have this space with that space, or this space with that space, so that they could have maintained the access to the airfield. So, I mean, we admittedly went through lots of scenarios and alternatives, but, you know, ultimately it just settled on adding this one conference room.
Okay, so I'm sorry, so how would, if the space were to be, the open space, the large space there, leased to another tenant, how would they access the airfield?
They don't. They don't. And
No,
that,
I'm sorry, how would Above All Aviation access the airfield?
well, Above All Aviation, and actually maybe that's a question for Above All, but there are doors, basically they're essentially going out their front door and going over to the access points to the airfield. They just, obviously you can get to it, you're just not traversing through the space to get to it. You enter through an outside gate. And maybe Teresa, you have a better idea of what gates are over in that area?
There's a pedestrian gate along the perimeter fence.
Okay, and today, at this moment, how do they access the airfield? Through the
Through the-
formerly Red Baron space?
No, they do not. That practice ended when Red Baron left the space.
I see, so there is effectively no change in how they'd access the airfield?
There's no change. I mean, it changed from when Red Baron was in the space.
I
That
see,
is
okay.
correct. But since last August or so, Above All has been accessing through the pedestrian gate.
I
So
see.
that would not
Okay.
change. That's correct.
Okay. So I had a couple other questions on emails that we were provided. It looks like back in August 10th, 2016, they, in an email, said they'd like to, again, revisit a month-to-month on some of the space in the back. We could then vacate if somebody else wanted to sign a permanent lease, or can you give us right of first refusal, or first right of refusal to pay for the whole space and sign a lease? Were they ever provided any indication of a first right of refusal?
We do not provide first right of refusal for any tenant, any type of tenant. That's just not a practice that we have here.
Okay, and then about a month later, September 16th, they made a statement that because of this, because of their school, they will be in need of extra space and are willing to take up a large number of rooms. Our only hesitation is, again, the large space in Zone 4, which is the zone that we're talking about
Yes.
here, that we just can't find of use to us. And then after that is when they added the conference room?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So the conference room in late September was really sort of when that was agreed upon, that would be the final sort of solution. And then it was definitively added in November.
Right, okay. And then, I guess as far back as a year ago, or almost a year ago, February 2016, they also indicated that they didn't have a use for the big space, just individual offices.
I have a question.
Yeah, I know.
When did you sign the lease for the new company? Was it January 1st?
Well, the lease is in place, however,
right.
obviously, it is not in effect until it is approved by commission. So it is
Okay.
not considered to be executed.
Okay.
Yes, Karen.
How does the space that Red Baron formerly occupied with their airfield access and the conference room that Above All is leasing, the single one, compare in total size to the area that Santa Barbara Electronics is interested in?
That is a good question, because the total space, and that's even including in a body, is 9,000 square feet. Yeah, I almost would need to ask Rebecca Fribley exactly what the square footage is on this smaller space right here. This space is, we know obviously, is 1,900 square feet. Looking at it, it appears that it's either around the same size or a little bit smaller.
I mean, it looks like it's
1,440, thank you.
It looks like it's got the divisioning that was part of the objection to taking the bigger space in the first place. And I guess I would think a divided space would be more useful.
It depends on what you're using it for. If you're using it for office space or, I mean, obviously the configuration of these two portions are quite similar. This is fairly dissimilar in that it's just an open space, really.
How do the rents compare if one were to take the divided space, as we'll call the Red Baron space, as opposed to the big open space?
Well, it really, again, it hinges on what the space is going to be used for. So a space that's being used for office is going to command a higher square footage rate than a space that is being used just for storage.
Can we know what that difference is? There a
Storage
substantial-
is approximately 85 cents a square foot, and office space somewhere around 138, 144, something in that. A little higher, she says, a little higher. Uh-huh, okay.
So what would be the difference if they were to rent that divided space versus the undivided space? Just for information's sake, we're talking about X per month versus Y per month.
1,400 square feet, and the aviation rate, which is a little less, you just have to basically calculate the square footage, 1,400 times $1.38 maybe a square foot.
Could we get a monthly total? I think that would be of interest as to why the divided space might not work.
I see.
Or is it not one that Above All wants? Or they want it at a better rate? I guess the other question would be, would Above All want the divided space at the rate that's the big space is going for?
I think we need to not turn this into a negotiating, session here. The airport and the property managers have approved by us specific rates for specific uses on specific buildings. And I think what we have here is we have a lease that we either need to approve or, disapprove and ask staff to go back and do something else as opposed to, it's clear from both the emails and the presentations that this has been an ongoing discussion for months, maybe. I
Years.
think one of these is February
Yeah.
of 2016, so it's been going on, parts of it for a year. And I don't think we should negotiate at this point. I don't think that's appropriate. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Has there been some discussion about subleasing?
There was some discussion about subleasing with Above All, and that was a discussion, essentially a floated idea to us that Above All could rent the large space there at a market rate, but then they would like to sublease that space to 3 other businesses in the space. And that was not acceptable to us simply because Above All, of course, is a flight school and not a property management company. So, and any tenant that would like to rent space in that space can obviously just come directly to the airport.
Thank you.
And,
Am I correct in my understanding that Above All Aviation in September indicated that they would lease the space at sub-market rate until someone wants the larger Zone 4 space at full price? And would that indicate that they would move out and release it to?
Yeah, that was another idea that was floated, and it really, I mean, it wasn't a practical idea because you really need to be able to show a presumptive tenant the space, and they need to know when it's going to become available. And once you move into a space, of course, it's, it's a fair amount of trouble to move in and out of a space. So
It would seem like to me that we're at that point now that someone has come along and offered full market rate rent.
Yes, that is correct. That is
Can I just ask one more question?
Certainly.
Since you have 98% of the properties rented supposedly, is there not other spaces for above all that they could, I'm just asking the question, that they could use for what it is that they're asking for?
Presumably, there would be potentially other space. I
Okay.
mean, this space that is seen here, the former Red Baron space, is obviously contiguous with their existing space. Other than that, it's hard to speak to what other spaces might be appropriate, but
Okay.
But the space, previously the above all space on the, I'm sorry, the Red Baron space over on the left is currently available.
it is vacant. Yes, it is.
Okay. And one last question, I believe the proposed tenant has indicated that they've already given notice, or they were forced to leave their current location already, and this matter needs to be decided basically at this
Now.
meeting today.
If they have
Yeah.
a place, they're going to have a place to go.
And they've indicated that if they don't have a place to go, they will most likely go out of business. That's what they've indicated, I think. Okay. No more questions
So
for
if
me?
there are no more questions or comments, we have before us a recommendation to approve and authorize to execute this lease. Do I hear a motion one way or the other?
I do so move.
Second?
All in favor?
That was a motion to approve?
Aye.
Oh, yeah.
That was a
Aye.
motion to
Aye.
approve,
Okay.
yes. All
Aye.
in favor?
I'll abstain.
One abstention? Aye?
Aye.
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 So it carries,
I'm opposed.
oh, opposed. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. The motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Next item is,
Actually,
they're still here. Oh, notices, I forgot here. We have a notice that on January 12th, the agenda was duly posted on the bulletin board. And sorry to keep you folks waiting so long. Our liaison reports, Councilman Frank Hotchkiss. You're going to tell us that the desal plant's been delayed again.
Well, that's true, but
No.
but thanks for bringing the rain.
probably in March, probably in March. But more importantly, there's another development that nobody could have foreseen that could be significant, and that is that the incredible amount of rain that's fallen in Northern California has meant that there's only 2% of the state that's now considered in a serious drought, and we're in it. And the water that we have stored in San Luis Obispo Reservoir that we purchased for $3 million, that reservoir is about to spill. And the way water rules work, the first water that spills is the guest water, that is to say stored water, which would be ours. So that means that we are in a process of negotiation with the state water boards that are involved with this, and have some prospect that they will make an exception to the rule that I just stated, so that we can, represents 3,000 acre-feet of water. In the meantime, we are aware that it's possible that we could lose that $3 million of water, and are scrambling to buy $3 million elsewhere, which is of course an expense, but we may have to pay it. So hard to say where that one's going. We're not going to dry up and blow away, but we may have an extra bill that we never would have expected. On the other hand, we're supposed to have 10 inches of rain by the end of the week in the mountains, which would be great. So as this gentleman's pointed out when I arrived, he said, well, that's because we're about to finish the desal plant, and therefore the gods are playing with us again, which is okay by me. We will keep going with the desal plant, no matter what, I promise. The only other matter I have to report is that we are developing what's called an oversized vehicle prohibition for parking in the streets, city streets in Santa Barbara, because those represent difficult sight lines to look around if you're pulling out into your driveway or parked behind them. And you may have experienced that yourself. The most glaring example I can think of is on Milpas, which is a pretty narrow street for a 4-lane street. And You really have to be careful because the traffic moves fast there. And there are a number of RVs particularly that park there during the day. So we're trying to, this is a safety issue, not an RV issue. And so we'll see where that goes. We'll have to make some adjustments, but it's caused a real considerable stir in the community because there's a whole new class of vehicles that are not RVs, that are not trucks, they're sort of extended, God, I don't know what to call them. The classic one is the Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, I think it's called, but there are others. And they are bigger than the base minimum requirements that we have set forth in the ordinance. But we're trying to make everybody happy, which is probably going to be impossible, but we'll work on that for a while. That's all I have to report right now. Thank you.
Frank, one question for you. If we paid $3 million for water and they don't give us that water,
Yeah,
are you saying we don't get the $3 million back?
right.
And exactly how does that work in a business situation? I don't quite understand that.
Well, in a business situation, I would call that a taking, and I'd go to court. I don't think, though, the way water rules are set out, that we have that choice.
Fascinating.
Well, maybe expensive, but maybe it'll work out, because we are, in this case, sort of an exclusive, exclusive turf, because we're part of the state that has the problem, but a very small part. So we're asking for an exception, working full force on that, whether we'll get it or not. I would have to say I'm pretty hopeful, but that's an easy thing to say.
Thank you.
3 million.
I don't quite understand how that works.
Councilman Bennett? I guess he had to leave. He bailed. All right, so, item number 12 is a recommendation of the Airport Commission receive a presentation on the formation of an air service alliance for Santa Barbara region, as well as recent air service development efforts. I would just, before we get to that, like to point out that this, from this little chart here, is the 8th month in a row that we have increased our year-to-date change has increased. So that part is doing very well. Yes.
Great news, it's great news. And I'm excited to be here in Hazel's place today because she's doing something that is very important to us, of course, and she's out on the road meeting with airlines. So she is meeting with a particular airline that is based in Atlanta today. So, and I am also excited to talk a little bit about a new milestone for our air service development efforts, and that is our new Air Service Alliance. And we also have Kathy Janega Dykes here today. I'm honored to have her here to talk a little bit about the involvement of her organization as well. Just a quick recap of where we are at in our efforts for increasing air service. I think we've talked a lot about in the past that it's essentially a buyer's market, if you use a real estate metaphor. There's a lot of airports out there with their real estate trying to attract air carriers. And that is just a reality that has been the case for quite some time. Airports are competing for air service and inevitably competing against each other. As much as we would love to all play nice in the sandbox, we realize that there is a limited resource out there that we're all competing for. These days, when you're out trying to make a case for new air service to an airport, the fundamentals of the marketplace are basically at this point a minimum must-have. And it takes more than that. But the strong fundamentals need to be there for a carrier to look at a market and understand that there is a means of profitability in that marketplace. Consolidation, of course, has made some of that more difficult in the sense that small airports, again, competing against each other and competing for that finite resource. I think we've looked at perhaps slides of this in the past, but here I think it was meaningful to show, even though it's not a big surprise to anyone perhaps, who our target carriers are for new air service to Santa Barbara. But you can see even with our existing carriers, American, United, and now Alaska, They all have a history of consolidation behind them, and as well as our target carriers. So we'd like to believe that this trend, it certainly is slowing down, and perhaps if we're lucky, the merger of Alaska and Virgin America might actually be a good thing for Santa Barbara. So the airline perspective of coming into a new market, of course, new routes they're a significant investment. That investment, of course, comes from setting up an operation in a new market, but also you've got that airliner that you are committing to a route, and that represents a significant capital investment. Come to learn that, aircraft are also a finite resource for carriers, and committing an aircraft to a destination is a big deal. And of course, the larger markets, they appear less risky. I mean, that kind of speaks to itself. And you've seen more consolidation to the larger airports, of course, over the last number of years. For Santa Barbara and other airports that are in a vicinity of competing airports, unfortunately, the reality of it is that for an airline, leakage from one airport may likely mean that they still get the business because they go to another airport where they also offer service. So in light of that, the carriers do seek to mitigate their risks in going into a new market. And that's where community commitment comes into play, is that it's no longer, if it ever really was, something that an airport administration could solely spearhead to try to attract new service. It really needs to be, in this competitive environment, it needs to be a community commitment. And that is something that, besides the minimum fundamentals of profitability, is something that builds confidence with air carriers that the service and the support for the service is going to be successful. So obviously Airport Administration is a supporter of these efforts, but it needs to be a more joint effort. And so forming an alliance, which I'll show you in just a moment, really is all about showing that confidence to the air carriers and acting in such a way to reduce the risks that these carriers perceive. And that can be in the form of revenue bonds, guarantees that a community might support. It may be specific marketing investments that they're looking for. Different air carriers look for different things. So we'd like to introduce to you the Santa Barbara Region Air Service Alliance. Formed it in late 2016. We, I should say, are still in the formation phases, but we're not bashful about getting out there in front of folks, including air carriers, showing the commitment of Santa Barbara and the region to new air service. It is currently a partnership between Visit Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara Region Chamber of Commerce, and Goleta Valley Chamber of Commerce. And we're all committed parties to marketing and community relations within our respective communities, and we're all good at that. So our next steps in the alliance is really to solidify, we've got our partners, at least our foundational partners, is to solidify our objectives, the structure, how we're going to operate. Some of that is sort of nitty-gritty organizational type things that need to be in place. We're looking to identify within the community a real champion for the alliance, and that could necessarily be someone who's a prominent member of the business community that really could get out there as essentially a spokesperson for the alliance in the community and with the air carriers. We need to determine what the target air carriers are looking for. Is it the revenue bonds? Is it guarantees? Or is it the marketing commitment? What are they looking for? And we need to determine that and adjust, calibrate what it is that we are focused on based on what they want. We need to broaden the community engagement, and we need to work to communicate to the community the economic impact as well as the personal and business benefits of new air service. Airports that have done this well have been able to communicate to businesses basically the bottom line. New air service will save your business X number of dollars a year in air travel costs with direct service to destinations. So we're excited to get started. It's a lot of work, but we're committed to it, and we've got some great partners with us, including Kathy Janiga-Dice.
Thank you, Deanna. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, my name is Kathy Janiga-Dykes. I'm president and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. We're the tourism marketing agency for the community, and as you can imagine, air service is critical to our industry. I'm not only speaking on behalf of our tourism industry, but I'm also speaking on behalf of the local corporate businesses here that rely on air service to make their own businesses profitable, and then also our local residents. So it's a pleasure to speak to you briefly about the strong and growing support for increased air service to Santa Barbara coming from the Santa Barbara community. I've been with my organization now for 12 years, and I've really seen the air service development strategy change. I mean, it's really quite amazing how the airline industry has changed drastically in just the last decade. So probably about 10 or 12 years ago, for those that have been here this long, the airlines used to walk in the door and they would say, we want to start flying out of Santa Barbara. Well, that's a very antiquated model that no longer happens. And in fact, in order for us to secure new service, we have to be very aggressive, we have to be very competitive, and we have to be very proactive. Another significant change in the last decade, as Deanna mentioned, this can't really, one person alone cannot be responsible for air service recruitment. In the past, it was the airport. This is a community effort. For us to see new service to the area, we all need to work collaboratively to try to attract that service. Thus, the importance of supporting the Santa Barbara Region Air Service Alliance. We know that we need the power of multiple community stakeholders to make this new service happen. And there's really multiple objectives to forming this, this alliance. First, we really have to take a much more strategic approach in identifying what markets we're interested in. For example, in my industry, not only are we looking at markets within California, but certainly those that are a little bit further away, such as Chicago. For local companies, they need to look at what other cities are important for their businesses as well. We also need to look at financial resources. In some cases, airlines are interested in coming here, but they need to address risk mitigation, thus the importance of looking at revenue guarantees. And then there are also other financial resources that airlines request, such as marketing support. Case in point is the new service from Dallas to Santa Barbara on American Airlines. In fact, Visit Santa Barbara was very responsible in helping launch that new service. They really needed some marketing support. We spent about $125,000 in the Dallas market to launch the new service. And then the airport here was really focused on promoting that new service here within the community. So as we can tell, it was a great opportunity. So the community partners now working with the airport staff are the Greater Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, Goleta Valley Chamber of Commerce, Visit Santa Barbara, and more. So I'm really proud to be part of this effort, and hopefully you will be supporting this as well.
Thank you very much. Comments?
I have a couple of questions. So what are the ideal attributes of a champion? You mentioned a champion when you were speaking.
Somebody who's well-known in the community, somebody who has a stellar reputation in the community, and someone who is willing to spend time and utilize their networks of contacts in the community to promote air service.
Have we identified such a person?
We have had a couple of candidates, and we've had some meetings with folks, so that's a recruitment effort in and of itself. But we know from looking at other airports that have been good and successful at this, they had to have people that were basically out there with the credibility of the community behind them.
So I don't suppose that's something we put a Craigslist ad out for. So
No,
how do we
no.
do that? How do we do that? How do we recruit?
You know, basically we're utilizing our own network of contacts within the chamber and Visit Santa Barbara to identify folks that most often are going to have a bottom line benefit from increased air service. And we've seen in other airports, again, that have been successful at this, that champion is actually willing to put up a commitment on behalf of their company and basically ask others to join.
Right. I mean, certainly we're blessed here in Santa Barbara, Goleta, Hope Ranch, Montecito with a number of very high-profile individuals. I don't know if there's a Craigslist for rich people, but, and then a second question, community partnership. So I can understand how the community, both Santa Barbara, Goleta, and the airport would band together some funds for marketing and help offset the airline's cost of marketing the service. That, as a business person, that makes very clear connection sense to me. Bond type stuff, I can't see an airline having to spend a whole lot of money other than, it's not like they're going to build a terminal, so I'm not sure where that would come in. But anyway, on the marketing side, the organization that, and I'm sorry, Visit Santa Barbara. That's a company, or what is that?
We're a nonprofit organization. We are a 501c6. We're partially funded from the city of Santa Barbara. We also received some funding from the county.
That was
and
my
then
question,
we also
is where do the
received
funds
private
come from?
revenues. Yeah, so it's
TOT.
yeah, TOT,
Okay.
but
Got
also
it.
private revenues as well too.
Thank you very much. When we talk about the community kind of banding together, I guess I'm envisioning, Santa Barbara kicks in some, Goleta kicks in some, Visit Santa Barbara kicks in some marketing dollars that we're then potentially going to offer back to the airlines and say, if you, as an additional incentive, if you come here, we'll help offset your cost of marketing in addition to the marketing we're going to do. Is that what that?
Essentially, that's what that is. In the case of Dallas, really, the airport committed the marketing funds that it had to that effort. And so you make that commitment. It is a dollar commitment then to them.
Do we think that pushed Dallas over the, I mean, it's hard to know which one thing.
It's hard to know if it is, because like I said, the fundamentals are there. It's sort of maybe the tipping point that gets them right over to feeling more comfortable about making that decision.
And then, this is my last question.
It's okay.
I realize this
Very
is
important.
well outside of airport related, but every time I see a cruise ship parked out here, I think of the thousands of people, which are 10 times what gets off an airplane, although obviously they don't have as much frequent service. Is that something that Visit Santa Barbara is actively involved in, attracting cruise lines here?
Yeah, we just actually completed a economic impact study of the cruise ship industry as well. We'll be presenting those results to City Council in 2 weeks as well. But yeah, significant immediate economic impact from the cruise ship passengers. For Visit Santa Barbara, we're actually really interested in their intent to travel back to Santa Barbara. About 48% of the passengers that come here are actually first-time visitors.
Good point,
And
yeah.
about another 40% are planning to return to Santa Barbara in the future.
Which hopefully they'll do by airplane, so there you go. Okay, all right, thank you
Not
very much.
cars.
I had a question. So what sort of programs are in place to kind of promote this program, like, press outreach and so forth, and to try to attract those champions?
And that's really part of the marketing strategy that we're developing at this point is how, and we have some models for that. We have looked at some other airports that have had similar coalitions and how they have done it. So we sort of have a blueprint that we're following, but that is sort of the first order of business. And Visit Santa Barbara has committed to being sort of the organizational home of this, if you will. And if it gets to the point where we are working to generate some sort of a revenue guarantee or that kind of arrangement, then Visit Santa Barbara will be helping with that.
Okay. But you have in effect plans for a marketing program for the marketing program.
Yes,
Okay.
and it involves a lot of
You need that.
community meetings and that kind of thing. It's really, it's boots to the ground, meeting with people, and, yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I was just going to say that I was quite amazed in looking at a long-range ticket pricing the other day, and when I found that if you just went as far as San Francisco, it was one price. If you came all the way to Santa Barbara, it was $250 less. And I'm wondering if anybody is focusing on that interesting aspect, and I just did it by trial and error, that actually, I think it takes you out of the competition of the marketplace from X to San Francisco, which has a lot of competitors, because if you're coming all the way through, but that struck me as something that would be of real value, because that's what we're obviously trying to sell, and if it's cheaper, I think a lot of people would sit up and say, wow, I didn't know that. What a good idea.
I made a comment at a previous meeting that I had recently made reservations from Santa Barbara to Hawaii and looked to see what it would be to fly out of Long Beach or LAX. And if I had driven down there, I could have saved $100 on 2 round-trip tickets. I can't drive down there and park for $100, let alone all of the hassle, et cetera. I think the idea that Santa Barbara is in a very expensive market is false. That there are many times that driving that extra distance ends up costing you more. Any other comments? Next item is year-end employment review and look ahead. And we receive a presentation.
All righty, the last one for the evening, but this is saving the best for the last, I would say. This is all good news, as I think you will see. We're feeling pretty good about things. So as we know, we had a banner year this year. We had consistently positive numbers from June on, and actually even more or less flat prior to that. The greatest growth, of course, American with the new Dallas service. It's simply on fire. There's no other way to describe it. The Alaska launch of brand new larger aircraft. They were flying the regional jets, and now they have a much larger. It's like a real airplane, and they're beautiful. They really are. And those also, as we understand from Alaska, their service is going gangbusters. So everyone is very happy, and of course, Dallas, the service, American, has been very forthright with us that it was more successful than they anticipated. And when they expected drop-off going into the fall, it didn't happen. So they're very great about that. And of course, we talked about, I think Hazel's mentioned before last year, that we experienced a lot of ad hoc added flights to meet demand, particularly around the holiday season, where all of a sudden we're hearing that they're adding frequencies to meet demand, and that's, it's great because they know that there's a demand that they need to capture. If there's anything that was, something we couldn't capitalize on, is that United did have quite a bit of operational disruptions towards the end of the year, particularly, and that just means that a lot of canceled flights, particularly October and December, there were canceled flights due to SFO weather. So had that not happened, of course, our numbers would look even better. So, but it's in general a really good picture. So you have also this in your packet, looking at the overall growth trend. Alaska and United grew some. United, again, as I said, without disruptions, would have been more impressive. American, though, gangbusters, and of course they're fueling the overall increase for the year. And in the aviation industry for commercial airport, 5.2% is fabulous. It really is great. We have what we would say guarded optimism about 2017. The market fundamentals are still there. It's a great market for air carriers out of Santa Barbara. The Alaska Virgin America merger, it may be the first instance where a merger actually will be a good thing for us, because it's well understood at this point that Alaska, by virtue of that merger, is really trying to shore up California, their dominance in California, and they're not the only one. So Southwest is also very interested in sort of staking their claim. So we may get a little bit of a turf war going on, which would be great. Again, the Dallas service was so impressive that American is putting mainline aircraft. They're putting an Airbus 319 starting April 2nd. So now we're, of course, we have good problems because we're trying to figure out how we can get that big of a plane at a gate. So with our gate configuration. And those are all good problems to have. We love those. On the possibly somewhat pessimistic side, we know that some carriers right now have some shortages of aircraft. Alaska, Southwest, others have been retiring aircraft, 737s. And so, for example, Alaska's retiring some 737s. They have a ton in the pipeline, but in the short term, they're going to be struggling to find aircraft to fill all of their routes. So, so that could be potentially in the short term problematic, but a short term hump. So our current air service work, just to summarize a little bit of what we talked about before, we formed the alliance. We have completed the catchment area analysis, and our air service consultant will be here in February to give you a full presentation of that. I won't steal their thunder, but I'm going to share a few tidbits from that that are particularly interesting. We've completed some fresh presentations for the air carriers, and of course Hazel and Kathy have been out meeting with airlines and using that presentation and conducting those one-on-one meetings. And of course they will continue to meet at industry conferences and such with air carriers. And of course at this point, when we're getting information out there to the carriers, they are coming back to us with follow-up information requests. They want to know everything from how many people have second homes in Santa Barbara, how many people, they're looking for more data, and we are more than willing to give it to them. So just where we are today, of course, we have our 7 nonstop destinations, about 2021 peak day departures. We, at some point in the holidays last year, we were up to maybe 24 a day, so it was kind of a great thing. This is what our market share looks like, and this is fresh data. This is 2015 data as far as the share of the business that our carriers currently have. So obviously United is still more of the dominant player in Santa Barbara, but you can see there's kind of a back and forth with American now because of the service they've added. So this slide I wanted to add this evening because we're talking a lot about direct air service. And this chart here really shows the difference it makes when you do have nonstop service. So on the left, you can see that when Santa Barbara has direct nonstop service to a chosen destination, we will keep 40% of the travelers in our catchment area will fly out of Santa Barbara. If we do not have nonstop service to that destination, we lose a good portion of that, about half of that, a little more than half. So 19% of those folks no longer choose to do a one stop to that destination. They choose to essentially leak to another airport with that direct service. So it's confirmation enough for us that we need to continue those efforts for the nonstop service. The destinations with the greatest leakage would be interesting to see here because Las Vegas is our greatest leakage market. Basically, no one is really starting their trip to Vegas from Santa Barbara. They're going somewhere else. New York is not surprising. You see a lot of smaller airports that have a lot of leakage to New York destinations. Denver, you can see there at number 3. We actually have service to Denver. What this tells you is we don't have enough service to Denver. And of course, we do have some, obviously, leakage even still with our Phoenix and Seattle service and the Bay Area service. So it gives us a clue as to where we need to be focusing our efforts. This right here is the total leakage distribution. So if you look at the left-hand pie and look at that as being 100% of our leakage, basically 70% of that is going to LAX. A smaller portion is going to Burbank than maybe we would have expected. The right-hand pie is interesting because what it's showing you there is that of the travelers in our catchment area that are leaking to another airport, they are doing so and flying on a different carrier. And WN there is code for Southwest Airlines. So there is a significant portion that are leaking from Santa Barbara and in turn flying on Southwest. And of course, United and American are still represented there as well. So when we get out and we market Santa Barbara, we talk about how it's a place like no other. These are basically examples of those market fundamentals. You can't beat it. Carriers like numbers, and so we give them lots of numbers along with sort of the subjective attributes of Santa Barbara. And we also did share we've been sharing with our air carriers. Our Facebook page is a place where we feel really good every day because we get virtually everyone rating us either 4 or 5 stars. Sometimes they don't comment, but many times they do, and they're universally comments like this about what a wonderful airport Santa Barbara is. And this also does matter to the air carriers, that there is a customer experience here that can't be beat at a larger airport. So that is sort of the outlook for 2017. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to.
Questions or comments?
I have a question that might have been more appropriate for the last item, but Service to San Jose, so Surf Air has done a great job filling a hole that was left when service to San Jose was terminated with United, I believe. SkyWest. I completely understand the, going after mainline carriers, larger airplanes, and real airplanes. Those of us who fly airplanes think they're all real, but that's beside the point. So these other airports, for instance, San Jose, I fly to Asia fairly frequently, and San Jose, doing the same thing that we do here, has been reaching out, and so they now have nonstop service from San Jose International. Given that I spent a fair amount of time in San Jose, I enjoy going to San Francisco Airport as much as you would enjoy going to LAX from here. It's parking is a problem, traffic is a problem, everything is a problem. Beautiful airport, but still a problem. So anyway, the point there is San Jose is now added nonstop service to Shanghai, to Beijing. There's a new service starting to India. And there's a fairly large component of technology-based companies here that lamented the lack of service to San Jose. And it's the China flight in particular is a very convenient flight out of San Jose. So anyway, my point there, not to make it personal, is I completely understand focusing on larger service, but there's a second derivative effect of if they can get from here to San Jose to get to China. So have there been any conversations with the airlines around the San Jose service, or is that just not going to go anywhere?
Really, the conversations have been around the trifecta of airports in that general area. It's Oakland, San Jose, and SFO. And carriers have different thoughts about which airports they prefer, mostly based upon their networks. So, I mean, the Bay Area for us is
all one.
Yeah, it's really considered to be one. If you ask one carrier, they'd say they prefer to fly to SFO. So I would think that we have a good shot at getting increased service to any of those airports, just because the demand is so high. Even Oakland has some really great international connections now.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
I think the one comment that deserves looking at is, of course, San Francisco is the airport with the weather problem.
Yes.
And when they screw up everybody. So I think the emphasis on using the trifecta to its best advantage, which is to say having another alternative there, is a real important one. And obviously San Jose has jumped on that fact that they can operate probably 99.8% of the time, and San Francisco probably comes in the 70s. So I think it's one that we miss for its point-to-point service, but I think it's now got a new opportunity as a very good hub for us that shouldn't be, totally not looked at because somebody's looking at Chicago, for example.
Absolutely.
Okay. Other comments? Director's report.
I just get to do it all today. So, but I'll try to keep it short because we've been here a bit today. So obviously, great story with our traffic counts. December was also another really good year for us. I think you've got on your sheet here that we were up, we were up 13% of all of our carriers in the month of December over December 15. And that's really consistent with what we did in November. Like I said, we could have done even better if we had avoided some weather disruptions, but still that is a great number to look at. As far as our other items, our marketing programs, the thing I wanted to let you know about, I think we're meeting before the Super Bowl takes place, but we have a new great television spot that we filmed with Mary Osborne, who is a well-known champion surfer and loves Santa Barbara Airport. And she filmed a spot with us for very little money, showing the convenience of flying through Santa Barbara. And so we have booked a couple of spots, not, with Pepsi and all those folks in the best Super Bowl slots, but if you're watching the pregame, you could see a couple of our spots. And we're pretty excited about that spot. And Mary is also agreed to, we essentially have an airport spokesperson if we want one, because she's agreed to do any sort of advertising that we're looking for. So we're pretty excited about that. So a couple of other items. The master plan, last month, we talked about how we would be going to city council for some additional funding for some additional environmental study. And just to report, the city council did approve that amendment to the contract for it. So that is going to be commencing this month. We also have a couple of updates on, let's see here, meetings that are going to be taking place that are pretty critical here in the next few days, actually, tomorrow. The CIP plan for the airport is going before the Planning Commission tomorrow afternoon. And also tomorrow afternoon, we have been working with the City of Goleta with regard to the appeal of the 6100 Hollister development, and we have some conversations going on with them this week. Otherwise, the appeal hearing is set for City Council for March. So multiple avenues to try to work that issue. The car dealership is still caught up in the same issue that what we are with the appeal process for development. Budget is looking good. Revenues are above budget. Expenses are below budget, as usual. Looking at our encumbrances, we're coming in slightly above budget, but that also can fluctuate over time a little bit. So that all is looking quite good. And I think that is essentially what we need to share for this director's report.
Questions? Comments?
I have a question on item 5, the car dealership project. The last statement in that paragraph is, the project is stalled indefinitely. And then you said that that was in the same situation as the 6100 Hollister development, which is, there's an appeal scheduled for March. Is there going to be an appeal scheduled for the car dealership project?
Well,
or-
essentially what has taken place is the 61 Hollister project did go to Planning Commission, and then there was the subsequent appeal. Based on that outcome, the car dealership project did not actually go to Planning Commission, foreseeing that likely there would be the same result, since essentially they're the same types of questions that are being raised with those developments. So essentially, the car dealership development is on hold while we take a look at our project and hopefully find a resolution to our project that, by nature of that, would transfer to that project as well.
So the interested party there, the developer, they're still engaged. They're just
They're still
awaiting-
engaged. They're still
Okay.
engaged. It's just, it doesn't appear at this point that moving forward with their project to Planning Commission would be particularly fruitful.
What is the basic objection?
In their case, well, specifically, it has to do with the traffic study and the implications with that. I think Hazel explained that the City of Goleta, for developments in the City of Goleta, have a development fee, essentially, that is paid. Goleta has indicated to the car dealership that they're interested in them paying a fee for that. And, of course, that was not contemplated in their original plans. So
But the development is within the city of Santa Barbara.
it is within the City of Santa Barbara.
Questions, comments? We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.